owe me a pizza. Mister, can you find my cats? And then they beat the shit out of him. You owe me a pizza. You owe me a pizza. You owe me a pizza. Hello everyone and welcome to Boss Door, the threshold beyond which games must face their final and toughest opponent, the critical gaming public. My name's Ross and I'm here with my co-host Joey, and today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, when the remake came out, I was not particularly interested in playing this game. It's not really in the genre of games I like to play. I was not a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII, but you, Joey, played it on your own, and I want to hear a little bit about how that experience went. And why is this the cast we've chosen to do first?
So this is one of the most anticipated games, like, maybe ever, because they announced it over 10 years ago. Now, I'm a big turn-based JRPG guy, so a lot of people who were like me were pretty much obsessed with Final Fantasy VII when they were younger. I only played it like 3-ish years ago, like maybe 4 years ago, not too long ago. You know, I played other Final Fantasies, but I just like never got to 7 because I aesthetically like the kind of spritey Super Nintendo era a little bit more. So I was kind of slow on the Final Fantasy VII. So, you know, a lot of people, they think it's their favorite game of all time. I think some of that might be you played it as a child, but I played it, 3-4 years ago, as like a 26-year-old or something, and I thought it was pretty good. It wasn't great, but I thought it was fine. I liked it. I liked a lot of the stuff it did. So, some of the stuff that people talk about with the old Final Fantasy being kind of outdated graphically, gameplay-wise, all that kind of stuff, I think is pretty true. Even though I like older games, I still think some, like the Chrono Triggers of Final Fantasy VI's hold up a little bit better, personally. But I like the game, and when I saw the trailers, we had this trailer for a long time where it was when he jumps off the train, he fights a bunch of guards, and then it's actually jumping on the train. It doesn't really matter. But you see that first scene where he fights a bunch of Shinra lackeys, and then he jumps on the train, and you're like, look at these graphics. And I think that is a big appeal for a lot of people with Final Fantasy, is visually, they tend to be almost next-gen looking, right? Like, even when I wasn't a big fan of Final Fantasy, I would look at, I think it was Final Fantasy 11 or something, which is the MMO. The graphics for it, and I would just be like, this is so much better than what we had at the time.
Yeah, I've seen people playing Final Fantasy 11 back in the day, around 2006, 2007.
I think so. It was on the PS2.
It was I think it was a little bit before that time also, but that was when I was playing World of Warcraft, and I had another friend that was playing Final Fantasy 11, and I was like, this game looks so much better. And every Final Fantasy, that is the case. Yes, they're well known for their high graphical fidelity.
So a lot of people talk about how the graphics don't hold up for the old game, and I honestly don't even think that's true. Like, a lot of people talk about the pop-eyed arm, character models like Cloud, because it's all early polygonal.
Right. Yeah, they all look like they look like they're carrying big cubes on their arms. They're smuggling cubes somehow.
Yeah, it actually didn't occur to me for a long time where they're supposed to be chibi style, and someone pointed that out one day, and I was like, oh, I guess they are. I just can't tell because it's so old. But the kind of the backdrops you have in that game, when you go into the bombing run or whatever, the reactor, thank you. Whenever you go to the reactor, it actually looks really good.
Yeah, the background art in that area, like the actual area, looks fantastic. Even if the characters are just kind of a pile of squares, the actual areas look like almost like they scanned some photos in there. They look so good.
Yeah, so I think the early game is actually really good at conveying the aesthetic. One thing that's not really in this game, because the game ends at Midgar, is the second you leave Midgar and you see the overworld Midgar and how much different it looks in the rest of the world, I think is still really impactful, even though the overworld looks like all old overworlds, which is just, sea and green. You know what I mean? There's
exactly.
Not much going on. So, even though I think the graphics still held up, it kind of seemed fun to just hang out in Final Fantasy VII with better graphics, and maybe less just archaic-y dumb bullshit. Auto-saving is nice. I think the combat's fine in 7, but, some updated stuff. So I was relatively excited, except for they announced it was only going to be the Midgar section, which is a 5 or 6 hour section of the original game for I don't remember exactly, but it's like a 30 or 40 hour original game, maybe longer. And they basically just do the tutorial. So they only did the tutorial section, and it kind of felt like the kind of classic gaming thing we do now, which is, how can we milk our customer base as much as possible?
Yeah, that's what it did feel like. It felt like, I think everybody's first instinct was like, is this a cash grab, you know? The idea of, well, we're gonna take what's supposed to be a remake and turn it into 3 separate full-priced games. That seemed real bad.
Actually, I disagree. I think a lot of people were just like, ooh, Final Fantasy VII, gimme.
More Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and
fools.
You can make games longer and they be entertaining. But I also saw, like, for me personally, Midgar has some good early flavor, good kind of establishing the world. But I honestly think it's one of the worst parts of the game. Like, when I was playing Midgar about 3-4 years ago, I was actually texting Ross a lot. And at one point, he literally was like, you clearly don't enjoy this game. Just stop playing.
Yeah, I was really like, look, I know it's Final Fantasy VII, but it doesn't hold up.
Yeah. And I think after, when I got to the overworld and started doing more of the game and seeing characters like Sid and characters I like more, I had way more fun. I think a big problem with early Midgar is, again, just PS1 problems, where you're in an environment and you literally can't find the exit because the foreground, background stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense. And just little stuff like that, where you're just like, I'm getting in all these random monster encounters because I visually can't parse the path.
Yeah, that was quite a problem. They had really good graphics, but it was really hard to see where you're supposed to be going, because you were sort of navigating like a 3D space with a 2D visual camera. So everything you didn't know what you could walk on, what you could walk under, things like that. But what I want to know, why have we chosen this for our first cast? We've got a good history of Final Fantasy VII. What is it about the remake that's driven us to such lengths?
So I had a very extreme opinion about it. Now, this is going to sound hyperbolic, but when I first went into the game, I was actually pretty excited. Like, I played the demo. Demo was pretty fun. I was, like, really in a Final Fantasy move. I think I just played 10 or one of the Final Fantasies. And I was just like, man, I really just want to play kind of, like, the pretty-looking Final Fantasies. And I started the game, and, for a bit, I was having little critiques and little things. And it was literally around Chapter 4, I was like, I think this is bad. And then from Chapter 7 onwards, I have never been angrier playing a video game. And I don't know why I felt compelled to beat it. I think at the time, the game was pretty recent out, and everyone's like, you'll never believe the crazy ending they do. And I'm like, now I have to see it so I can complain about it. So it became more of a chore. I usually finish the games I start, but it kind of became, well, now I just have to beat it. And I was literally I work at DoorDash, so I can just take days off, whatever. I took extra days off to just beat the game, so I had to stop thinking about it. So I was doing these, 12-hour marathon sessions, and literally just almost seems like overreacting, but seizing with anger. Because I kept seeing what the game was doing, which was slowing me down, making me literally crawl through sections so they can make the game feel longer with no real narrative payoff. And for me personally, I don't need games to 100% focus on story. I don't need if you have for example, Final Fantasy X, which I beat right before this game, I think there's a very good combat section, and some of the story elements are just unfathomably stupid. There's some really good story elements, but the story elements that were unfathomably stupid were really easy for me to let go because I enjoyed playing the game. But I almost enjoyed nothing of playing the game from the second half onwards. There's stuff I like in the game, but I don't think I've ever disliked a game more than this game while playing it. Because if there's games where just the combat doesn't work or the whatever doesn't work, I just stop playing. It's just easy to let it go. But it became such a cultural touchstone. Everyone was raving about how good it was. I was trying to find a reason to like it. And I found more reasons to hate any other game than I've ever played in my entire life.
Yeah. So I played Final Fantasy VII about 15 years ago. I don't remember most of it. I only played it once. And I never had strong connections to it. But when I was looking up reviews of this game, almost every review started with the phrase, Final Fantasy VII was my favorite game of all time, or something similar, one of my favorite games of all time. And then they would go on to praise almost every aspect of the remake with little to no criticism involved anywhere. Or just the minorest touchstones of like, yeah, sometimes they make you shimmy through things, and that slows the game down a bit. But when I played this game, I was in hell almost every minute that I played it. It is one of the worst games I've ever played, partially because of the potential it has as a AAA title to be so much better. I've played games that are like harder to play. We played Super Star Wars last night, but it's hard to. It's an extremely bad game for the SNES, but it is hard to find a game that made me so very bored and angry the entire time that I played it. So let's get into why that is, because this is a controversial opinion. A lot of people, not just a lot of people, a lot of people think this game is incredible. It's the God's gift to remakes. It's everything to them, right? Everybody's just like, oh, this is everything I could have wanted from a remake. And to me, this is a textbook example. This should be the standard of what not to do with a remake. So I want to get into that.
So I think there's a thing that with games, me and Ross talk about a lot specifically, and we will probably talk a lot about in this cast, where we have sort of games, I think, the modern AAA game is so much dominated by expectations. I think a lot of games come out with positive reviews before anyone's played it. Or like in the impression of the, not just, people who write reviews, but in the impressions of players' minds. There are obviously exceptions. Everyone was hyped for No Man's Sky, for example. And then that came out and it just felt big and empty or whatever. But I think for Final Fantasy VII, and I don't have an opinion about Last of Us 2 yet. I haven't played it. But there's games like that where everyone has this expectation and they're looking for... It's confirmation bias.
Yes.
They're looking for reasons to like it. Or they're looking for reasons to hate it. And the other Final Fantasy games don't have that benefit of the doubt anymore. When 15 came out, people kind of played it and think about it how they think about it, because 13 was so unpopular. So I think one of the reasons they did this specifically is because they know there's no way this game's not going to sell. There's almost nothing the game could be, right? Tifa could literally be in a fucking loot box. And people would be like, yeah, but you can get like Tifa with a different outfit from Advent Children, so I gave them $300.
Yeah, that's $15.99, but you could do it.
Yeah. So I think there's an expectation going in this game. And like we already said, so many people's favorite game of all time. Because for a lot of people, it's really the first JRPG they played, especially kind of the generation who has a more disposable income, right? We're having all these 30-something-year-olds, late 25-year-olds, who can just buy a PS5 if they can get one.
Yeah.
And play whatever game they want. And they're going to like things that remind them of when they were younger.
And that's a good point, because the original Final Fantasy VII came out in 1997.
Yeah.
Older than most people that will be playing the remake.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of make it clear that I came in with hopefully positive expectations. Even though I played it first and complained a lot about it to Ross, Ross is very good at saying, I need to come up with my own opinions. And you watched some reviews of people you like saying you thought it was good, right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research on this game.
But before he played it.
Yeah, before I played it, I've done quite a bit more after I've played it. And I had a very similar experience. I did play it, and you did tell me you thought it was bad. But that doesn't mean I have to think it's bad. So I played it, and boy, I thought it was bad.
So, yeah, I just want to kind of, set the stage and, make it clear, as I accused other people of having confirmation bias for just liking the game as a child.
Yeah.
And I knew this game was probably a cash grab. Like, I like JRPGs. I like them more than most people. So I still wanted it to be good. And I don't want to have the same kind of, accusation against myself that I gave to other people.
Yeah. And it's not like I hate everything in the game. There are parts of the game that are fun. And that kind of makes it worse. Because there are parts of the game that are very fun, that are like well crafted, and then most of the game is just kind of a trudge through drudgery.
So, kind of want to talk about like Chapter 1, because a lot of people have also just played the demo before they played the game, and that is the first chapter. The first chapter of the game and the demo are the same thing.
Yeah, the demo.
It's kind of sold me to buy the game.
The demo just goes to the first reactor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, anyways, what did you actually think at the beginning of the game? Because you played it more recently. For specifically just the opening. For the first chapter and how that all felt.
Right. I started playing the game as a critical experience. I wanted to understand what people were saying and why your opinions were so different from everything that I saw online. So the first chapter, it wasn't bad, really. You go through the reactor and it's pretty dull. It's not very interesting to go through the reactor. All the areas kind of look the same. Nothing particularly interesting. There's no good enemies or anything. I think you meet your first like a buzzsaw, big robot enemy, and that was kind of fun, kind of a mini boss enemy at the time. And then you fight the Scorpion, and the Scorpion was a holdover from the first game, but it fought very differently, and you had to. It was really just to teach you like the combat systems and how to switch between people. And I thought it was a bit difficult to understand. I don't think I did the fight very well. I'd certainly do it much better by the end of the game, but overall it wasn't bad. The combat system was fun, except for I got to mention this: the goddamn tutorial messages. Right at the beginning, I literally walk up to a thing, and on my screen it pops up with a button indicator. It says press triangle, and then a tutorial pops up that tells me to press triangle when I see an indicator that tells me to press triangle. So I did that.
There's a level of tutorial that is obviously helpful. Not everyone's played RPGs before, but so much of the tutorials were just literally telling you things that were on the screen. And it's like, literally the people who are playing this game for the most part are people who've been playing games since 1997 or around-ish that time. And I just want them to assume that I've played a single game in my life. Like, it feels like a minor complaint, but one of the most iconic parts to a lot of people for Final Fantasy VII is that opening where you jump off a train and you're just Cloud, and you're just going at it, and you're in a bombing mission, and it's, the In Medeus race thing. You're just in the middle of the action. And the fact that they're constantly trying to do this, like, high-paced, jumping over the turn tiles or whatever to go do this bombing run, and they're like, treasure chests get opened by pressing the button that they're opened in every game you've ever played in your life.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is the first instance of like bad pacing. You jump off the train and they're like, freeze time. Here's the tutorial message, and you're like, oh, okay, now I know how to swing my sword. And you start swinging your sword, and they're like, freeze time. You can swing your sword in other ways. And you're like, okay, cool. And then you beat the bad guys, and you walk through a gate, and they're like, freeze time. There's a chest right here. You're going to want to hit the button that's indicated when you walk up and look at the chest. And you're like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. Can I move on? And they're like, yeah, you can move on. And you walk on, and they're like, freeze time. Did you know you could sprint if you hit this button? You're like, yeah, I've been doing that already. And they just do that so much for the first bit. So all of the momentum that you have is just defeated almost instantly because they're just like, oh, here's a bunch of tutorial messages. And I know that seems like petty to complain about tutorials, but it is a thematic problem throughout the game. Every time something should be happening, the game will stop you and make you do something else to slow you down.
Yeah, so this seems, again, like we already said, kind of a petty complaint. But one of the things that's nice about, I think, games, story-based games, is the less hand-holdy they are, the more they can let you feel the flavor of what you're doing. And they do have, the voice acting early on, I think, is really good. But whenever Jesse, Biggs, or Wedge talk, I think they're all incredible voices, and that's kind of what you're expecting from this remake, right? Which are we probably know, but the three members of Avalanche who aren't in your party. In the original game, they're just kind of like side one characters, but you kind of meet them and you get this feel of, an eclectic band of eco-terrorists. And that intro does kind of succeed. Like, I think this is one of the initial things that made me think this game might be good, because, as you progress through it, there's just little, side talks and all that stuff. So, pettiness aside, I still think that the opening still has something that it adds to the game that the original didn't. So when you first start off in the bombing run, the Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge of it all, the people who just have 3 or 4 lines in the original game, I feel like are actually characterized. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of all of Midgar, is Avalanche. Not just who they are, but also what Avalanche means to kind of our character building. Because they are eco-terrorists. You're going to blow up a plant. And when the game starts, the first time you play it originally, the audience, are kind of like, oh, I guess we're good, I mean, we're fighting against, a corporate entity that tends to, especially in the 90s, were commonly villains, but at the same time, you're blowing up a plant.
Yeah.
It really makes you consider what you're doing.
Yeah. At the same time, our opinions of, large corporations and terrorism have changed dramatically since 1997.
That is a good point.
But at the same time, we tend to think Avalanche are the good guys in this situation, at least to some degree.
And it's, I think a little bit is because, I think Biggs, Wedge, Jesse's voice acting and character models help contribute to that, because they just seem like nice guys.
Yeah, they're just fun. They're just hanging out.
Wedge's voiced by Badger from Breaking Bad, an objectively goofy character.
Exactly.
And it's kind of hard to, see, over-the-top fat comedy guy as being, ill-hearted. So I think the intro kind of gives you that first initial impression that I think is really interesting, where you have to contrast the characters with what they're doing. So, I kind of like that intro, and it's, it is very, very tutorial-y, because you're kind of just fighting three guys in a combat system you're learning. You have a little cutscene with Wedge and Biggs and Barrett, and then you just keep moving on until you get the boss fight.
Right, and I was willing to forgive the tutorial messages. I thought it was egregious, but at the same time, it wasn't. I mean, it's not like that killed the experience for me. I'm like, as soon as these are done, the game will open up and be better.
Yeah.
But then we get to the end of the bombing run. We've successfully bombed the plant, and the explosion was bigger than expected and has done a bunch of damage to the streets outside. And so we then have to walk through the streets with all the people who, every time you get near them, say the same one line over and over again, constantly into your ears. And I know it's supposed to be world building, but it's actually frustrating because everybody's talking to you nonstop to the point where you can't understand anything they're saying. And then I have to say this, a tutorial message pops up telling me how to use stairs. They're like, hey, there's stairs. You can use them to elevate your position. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's just, there's not like a button to use stairs. You just walk up them.
It's the joystick.
Somehow there wasn't a tutorial on ladders. We made a lot of jokes about that. Every time I'd fail to get onto a ladder, I'd be like, they didn't teach me about this one.
But also, after there's a tutorial about stairs, there's one guy you can talk to who isn't just talking in the void. You can actually select him. And then he says, if you want to go up higher, use the stairs.
It's the same spot.
And you're like, so you literally have two messages to explain stairs. But, there's way more complicated stuff later in the game that they don't explain to you at all.
And what happens in these streets? You're supposed to be on the run from Shinra. You've just bombed a place. You're supposed to be seeing the consequences of your actions, right? You're supposed to be questioning what you're going to be doing. That's what's narratively happening. You're questioning the things you've just done and your place in this world. But instead, you've got 8,000 NPCs just all spouting one-liners at you, just being like, my home, I'm hurt, there's stairs over there. And then you, climb a ladder that takes you to, the roof, and then you go across the roof and, climb down the other side, and all that's there is a chest, and you're like, this is just taking a long time to run away. After a while, you've been in here for, 10 minutes, and you haven't run away yet. And it's like, what? This is weird. We're moving really slow, and I can't concentrate on what's going on.
And again, that's what's expected, which I don't want to quite fault the game at this point yet for that, where it's like, okay, you are making this section longer. You're probably going to have to fight more than 4 enemies before Cloud gets back to Avalanche. But it kind of, I feel like, ruins, again, the pacing of the whole game. So the bombing run is not that long. There's not that much stuff going on. But then right when you're done, and, there's a long boss fight, but I don't mind a long boss fight. It's kind of fun, and it's, again, much better than the original game.
Yeah, I actually kind of like the boss fight there.
Because early boss fights in all turn-based RPGs are kind of like, okay, you're going to fight this boss fight. You're probably going to want to mostly use the attack button. You don't have that many abilities yet.
Yeah.
And so they tend to, the early game boss fights in turn-based tend to be, problematic, whereas the boss fight for this actually, doesn't hold your hand. You have to figure it out, and it's enjoyable, right? But right after you fight a boss fight that doesn't take your intelligence for granted, they think you don't know how to use stairs.
Yeah.
If you could beat that boss fight and you couldn't use stairs, that's ridiculous. And then you just are dragged across the streets forever and ever and ever. And again, I don't want to super harp on saying, well, anything long in this game is bad, But in the original game, Cloud basically just offers them a distraction, jumps on a train, and comes back to the group. And you kind of feel this... You get why Cloud is special, right?
Yeah, Cloud somersaults into that train.
Yeah, like he's a hired mercenary, right? And they need him. Maybe they don't need him, but he's making their job a lot easier because other than Barrett, most of these Avalanche people are not particularly good fighters, it seems, you know? They have other skills, you know, like Biggs is hacking the door. I really still don't understand Wedge's point. Jess, he really wants to have sex with Cloud. I also don't understand her. Oh, she makes explosives.
She makes the bombs. She makes the bombs that make you do the bad things.
So you know, it's nice to have someone who can, you know, actually fight. But you kind of, like, lose the sense of Avalanche because you're just fighting wave after wave after wave of soldier. And at this point, you're kind of like, why weren't these in the plan? Right? Like, did they not know? Like, I fought a giant robot. There should be more people here to stop me or whatever. And it just feels like, you know, combat for combat's sake. But that's fine. I'm not, like, too harping on the game at this point. I'm just starting to feel like this might be what this whole game is like. It's just, well, this one thing that was 3 hallways in the original game is going to be 15 hallways. And you have to climb up and down ladders just to kind of find a single treasure chest and then go back to fighting.
Yeah, just to justify padding it out.
So early in the game, you see a lot of problems that might pop up later. But again, it's early in the game, you know, your impressions are pretty limited. You have girl who wants to have sex with Cloud too much. You have kind of long pointless sections. You have pacing problems. You're walking through the streets and you flash back to seeing Sephiroth in your head or real life. It's not clear.
Yeah, so Sephiroth's there too. We're not sure why. And it's not... They don't tell you who he is. So if you didn't... I mean, it's weird to think of a person who doesn't know who Sephiroth is. But, like, they're out there. People don't always know who Sephiroth is. So, like, it's weird that they don't tell you.
I think a lot of people, even if they recognize Sephiroth from other games or whatever, or now Smash Brothers, it doesn't mean they understand who he is as a character. He just sees them and shakes his head, all that nonsense. And it's just like, okay, I get that we're doing this, but also they did this in the original game and it wasn't fun there either. And now we kind of have our first story point that I think is kind of, you know, interesting in both games and kind of does the Final Fantasy VII thing that I think Final Fantasy VII original does really well, which is go from, I am bombing a reactor to, here's a girl handing out flowers. But one fun thing I think about the original Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy VII, is you constantly are switching the sorts of things you're doing. Like, you go from doing a bombing run to meeting a flower girl to doing mini games at Dave & Buster's to just having a goofy old... And that's I think a Final Fantasy staple is you can literally, like, watch someone die and they'll be like, you want to ride a chocobo? They're goofy. You know? Like, it's just... It's fun in the middle of seriousness. And I think one of the really iconic scene, again, is the first time you see Aerith, who is just handing out flowers to random people. And you kind of, it's such a sharp change because you go from, we live in this horrible, like, steampunk city that it's people are clearly unhappy here, right? There's tons of poor people. It's completely run by an evil corporation. And there's just some girl handing out flowers, which is, you know, it's sweet and nice, and they play the Aerith theme, and it's enjoyable, right? But they change it in this game in a weird, peculiar way. So we played the original game recently to refresh our memory, and I think that scene is actually, I think, one of the most iconic scenes in the whole game, because the foreground and the background kind of shows, like, how the city is, like, gross and dirty and not a good place to live, and there's just this, you know, shining light in the middle of innocence who just gives a flower to the aggressively tough guy. And it's, you know, it establishes kind of, you know, the two sides of Cloud, right? Where he's trying to look tough, but he's also, like, taking a flower from some random girl, you know? But what they do instead is she's surrounded by ghosts.
Yeah, she's surrounded by ghosts in this one, and then Cloud has to go in and, I guess, chase off the ghosts. And then she's like, oh, wow, thanks for helping me. Do you want this flower? And Cloud's like, no. And you're like, why are you doing that, Cloud? Because at this point, we also have no backstory on Cloud, so we don't really know, like, who he is as a person. He's been entirely quiet and gruff the whole time, but you don't know why. And you still don't know why. And he's just kind of rude to Aerith and that's it. She gives you a flower, and that's your characterization for your main character. He's just kind of rude.
And again, in the original game, you have a choice. You can say no or take the flower. Because that's kind of how role-playing games work, is they give you two options that, reflect your personality, and you kind of pick the personality of your character. This game has choices, but it's basically like, no and fuck off.
Exactly.
So again, pretty pointless complaints, not a big deal, but we eventually get to a 7-7 bar with our team Avalanche. So this is the kind of the part of the game that you think would be good for a remake, right? You're in the first kind of area. It's not like a dungeon, right? You're just in a place. And we have time to flesh out the characters. We've seen a little bit of Jesse and Biggs. We've seen a little bit of Barrett. We've seen a little bit of Cloud. And, they all have good voice acting, good models. This is, I think, a part of the game, that I'm excited about. Now, you end up just doing very pointless side quests for a bit. But that's whatever. That's going to happen in video games.
Yeah, they're pretty... The side quests aren't interesting in this section. It's like, go here, kill rats. But you're like, whatever. They're early game side quests. I guess I'll do it. It's not fun, but I'm not, at this point, I'm not going to fault the game for it.
Yeah, you get to see Tifa for the first time, which is a big hype for more than half the people playing. And they're really excited about that, even though she has absolutely no discerning personality traits.
She's got 2 specific traits.
Yeah. It's her boobs. So whatever. I mean, literally one of the side quests is just find cats, and the whole world is full of NPC cats. But those are the cats that don't matter.
Yeah, not those cats. You got to find specific cats, and then the cats you find run away from you, and you're like, did I find the cat? But then when you go back to the person, I think it was a kid. You go back to the kid, and they're like, you found my cats, and you're like, oh, I guess I did that quest.
The actual best part is when you get to the third cat and just runs away. Cloud just goes, this sucks. And you're like, okay, the game kind of knows what they're doing.
Yeah, you're like, okay, I guess if you're going to make a meta-contextual remark on how bad your side quest is, does it make your side quest not bad?
Yeah.
That's a different topic.
Yeah. So I think, again, this is where it's really hard to get focused on the feeling of the game this early in the game. But then you have your first kind of, what I would think would be what the game has a lot of at the time, which is a side quest focused on characters that wasn't in the original game. Because right now, pretty much everything has been in the original game. Side quests were in the original game, but whatever. They're obviously going to add that. You go on a mission with specifically Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, which are interesting because Avalanche, I think, is overwhelmingly the most interesting part of this game in the original game. And you kind of want to get a feel for what they are beyond just people who work for an Avalanche.
Right. And this quest is the catalyst for this quest is that Jessie felt bad about destroying part of the city with her bomb. She was like, oh, I made my bomb too big. I did it real bad. So I want to go raid Shinra for better supplies, and I'll make a proper bomb next time for the next reactor. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Not only does Jessie have lines this time in this game, but she has a personality. She's like, oh, I felt bad about the thing I did. About the terrorism I committed. And, that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And now, albeit, I think Jessie has, an interesting model and a good voice actor, but also most of everything she said has been thirst for Cloud.
Yeah, most of everything she has said or will say is hitting on Cloud to some degree.
Yeah, but you can it's at least for her, it just feels like, okay, big tough guy shows up in their thing and she's just being playfully flirtatious. How far could this realistically go?
Oh, you stupid child.
Stupid child. And I really like Biggs and Wedge's voice. I think they look really great. And, I'm excited to go on this quest. So the first thing you do is go on a really long, horrible motorcycle minigame.
Yep. You go down the streets on your motorcycle, and other motorcycles ride past you, and then slowly you catch up to them, and then you can hit them with your sword. And you do this for 10 straight minutes.
Yeah, and there's really no character development or anything. Obviously, Jessie's behind you, clinging desperately to her new boy toy.
Yeah.
And Biggs and Wedge are there, seemingly not helping, but whatever, that happens in a lot of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then also, a just random frickin' Yu-Gi-Oh villain shows up. Literally, he's just on his bike, and someone passes him. He's like, my time to shine. And you're like, who the fuck are you? And then he's just giggling as he does ridiculous stuff, and you fight it incredibly easy.
He's doing motorcycle gymnastics while fighting you, and you're like, I don't know who you are or why you're doing this. And he's like, you won't ever know, and rides off into the sunset.
You're like, okay, maybe there's gonna be more Biggs and Jesse stuff, and you experience weird different bosses there. He'll surely show up again. But moving on. So you go up to top of Midgar. Another thing I'm actually excited about, because so far you've been in the slums and they just look like dirt. Maybe the slums will look better at some point, but it's just dirty hovels and nothing's really there. I kind of want to see top side of the plate, because there's lots of visual stuff you can do with the impressive graphics of the game. It looks exactly like 1950s America, and it's one block of suburban houses, and there's really nothing of interest.
You can't go anywhere or do anything, and every house looks exactly like every other house. And then you go to Jesse's house, and Jesse's like, Cloud, you wait outside. And then when we go in and have pizza, you sneak in the back and steal my dad's keycard, because my dad works for Shinra. And you do that, you wait outside, and then they go in and have pizza, and you go to Jesse's dad's room, and you have to do it real quiet so nobody hears you, right? But her dad's like dying in his bed, and you have to you take his keycard, and you're like, I wonder what all this means. Like, why are we seeing like Jesse's sickly dad and stuff like that? No reason.
Yeah, it'll never come up again.
That won't ever come up again. So then you go to Shinra. Cloud doesn't get pizza. This is a critical plot point. Cloud does not get pizza.
Yeah. And Wedge, he really likes pizza because he's the fat one.
Wedge gets a lot of pizza. He wants more.
So, we're talking a lot about plot and order, but I think there's a couple of, this is when I feel like the complaints crystallize. Because there's a couple of things. They're like, okay, Jesse, gave Jesse a backstory. She has a sick father, and you find out from stuff on the ground that she wanted to be a dancer. But that's it. There's nothing interesting about that, right? So what's interesting, not that she's thirsty, not that she wants to be a dancer, is she feels bad about the thing they're doing, which is morally ambiguous. That is interesting to me, and I think most people who partake in narratives.
Yeah. Saying Jesse wanted to be a dancer is not a character. It is just a fact.
And it doesn't come up in any tangible way.
It never comes up again. You just find out, oh, she wanted to be a dancer. She has a sickly dad. That's it. That's not characterization. That's backstory at best. Because
it doesn't influence her actions.
Not even.
One of the other complaints that is, getting a little ahead of this section is you're like, oh, we're doing a side quest with these people. They're going to keep developing. Maybe there'll be a Biggs chapter. No, there's this exactly one Jesse chapter. And all of the character development she possibly gets is she wanted to be a dancer and her dad is sick, but it never influences her actions in any ways. The only thing that influences her actions is how much she wants to bone Cloud.
Exactly.
Her whole motivation for all of her lines, it seems, is purely about that.
And this is what gets me about this game is I hear everybody talk about how how well they characterized Avalanche, how they gave them such good backstories and such interesting characters and stuff. But this is it. This is the most we ever get out of any of them. Biggs has never developed beyond this point. Wedge never changes. He's always just He's just the fat guy, right? Jesse is always just thirsty. You never get any more. You never get to hear more about her feeling bad about about her bombing. She mentions how that she feels bad that she kills people with explosives later, but again, there's no consequences to these moments. There's no impact on the story or on her character. She just says she feels bad about something, and that's it. There is no change that comes from these things. And this is another running problem with the game. Is every time they bring up a philosophically interesting topic, they do not develop it past that moment.
Yeah,
not a line later.
Because the only thing to possibly get out of the dad is that's her motivation for joining Avalanche, and you would think, well, at least that can be expressed. At least you can see, oh, he got sick, because I think it says somewhere in there, he got sick from working in the Mako factories.
Yeah.
There's something that could be interesting about that. but she's 100% playful, right? Like, she just doesn't seem to care, except for the one time she says, I should get a less, big explosive. Another plot point that happens and then never develops again.
Yeah, and that's all we hear about it. And so when people say that they characterized Avalanche so well, like they give him interesting things, I think people see the potential that Avalanche has in this game, and then they extrapolate from there what Avalanche should have been in this game. But what I see is that they gave Avalanche more lines, and that's it. Avalanche is not, like, every member of Avalanche is not a more characterized version of themselves than they were in Final Fantasy VII. They just have more lines to say.
I also think they're overwhelmingly the best characters in the remake, and they're still just so fleeting and passing by.
Yeah, they're incredibly one-dimensional and flat.
Like Wet, for example. He has two things. He's fat and he likes cats. And like, that is it.
Yeah.
He's such a likable voice. He's so, but every single thing is just a very lazy joke about his weight and him liking cats. So you feel worse about bad things that happen to him, I guess, because he's just nice.
Yeah, he's just a nice guy, but...
Yeah. So, and again, I think a lot of people, like what Ross was saying, were very excited about, they developed Avalanche more. What a genius thing people were saying that they did. When it's literally the bare minimum of when you expand a 6-hour game to 40 hours. They better give Avalanche a personality, because what the fuck else are you doing with this time?
Yeah.
And then you go on to an incredibly pointless side quest that's also not that interesting, because when you get to the place to steal the explosives, Cloud fights an arena full of guys, and that's the whole mission.
Yeah.
You just keep fighting people until Jesse's like, I got the explosives, let's go. And like, they didn't even make the area. They just made a big open space for you to fight. Albeit, fighting's pretty fun.
Yeah, fighting is fun in this game.
I like the combat. It's a pretty good combat section.
Yeah. So it's not like you hate the motions you have to go through, but you just get to the end and you're like, what was all this?
Well, you hate half of them, because the first half is a motorcycle section where you're not having fun. Then you fight a bunch of people, and that's end of mission. Now, there's a couple things I just want to gloss by with this mission that I think are hyper egregious. So, right before you go in to fight a bunch of people, they're like, Cloud, give us a signal, and then you make the diversion so Jesse can get in and out. Cloud looks at this guy and then has a flashback to Tifa as a child, where they're in Nibelheim.
Yeah.
And they talk about, it's a kind of a cute scene, right? Where he talks about when he gets older, he'll like basically protect her, where she makes him promise to do it. It's weird, but it's in the original game. But it's in the original game when you're talking to Tifa. Now the impression I feel like I get is every time they do something good, they execute it wrong. Instead of having it happen when you're doing a bunch of side quests with Tifa, where any sane human being would put it, they do it when you're doing side quests with Jesse, which makes Cloud come off as incredibly uninterested in these people. He's like helping these people out, and he's like, I like Tifa better. Like, it's just so out of the freaking blue. And that could be a good scene, because it looks pretty, it's interesting. It actually has Cloud it's the first bit of character development, where basically Cloud is like, I do like to help people. I don't want to just help myself. That is a thing that triggers him to going back to actually help Avalanche on the second bombing run. But for this one, he only does it for payment, right? And he seems so uninterested in all of these people's plights, to the point that he's daydreaming about someone else as they're in the middle of a very important mission.
Yeah, exactly. And this is as much characterization as we've got from Cloud, is like, nothing has happened. He keeps having flashbacks and stuff, but he hasn't changed or grown in any way. He's just continually gruff and rude, and that's it. That's his whole character so far. Every interaction is just like, no, that's it. Or just like somebody talks to him and he's just like, I'll do it for money.
Though it's like, it's cool being an edgelord.
Yeah.
And like, it's just that, like, it's just so almost like,
he's too cool for school.
Yeah, and it's just like, and I get that the flavor of Cloud at the end of this game is supposed to be, he's trying to act tough, but he's dorky.
Yeah.
But like, he just kind of comes off as unlikable, And it's really hard to put yourself in his shoes.
Yeah, because he's not dorky in this game. He's just mean, you know?
Yeah, and everyone, like, the characters are... The other characters have good voice acting. They seem fun. They seem like... that feeling that you get from specifically Japanese RPGs, which is, aren't we all just friends? Like, it's cheesy, but it's fun. But you don't feel like that because you're just kind of a dick to everyone for no good reason.
Yeah.
When everyone... Like, because that is a contrast, I think, to Avalanche. Is they're a group of friends, but they're also eco-terrorists. You know, like you have to kind of weigh those sorts of things. Probably getting into the weeds this early, but there are two really important. Man, I want to like Jessie, but do they really have to go this far? Jessie is so thirsty to the point that she does two things that I cannot get over. When you get to the top side, there's a button, and you have to hold the triangle button to open it. It's like a lever that opens the door. She's like, Cloud, you do it. Which again, like, just open the fucking door, game.
Right, just do it.
And then, as you hold it and you open it, she looks at Cloud and says, you're so strong. You're like, you could just... there's a part where you lift a rock off her foot.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's the time to put that line that also shouldn't be in here because we have to put our terrorist lady as a fucking damsel in distress as much as we possibly can. And then when you're escaping back to the slums, you use parachutes to fly down, which is supposed to be a fun, goofy scene. But Biggs is strapped to Jessie, which is shocking she's not strapped to Cloud.
Yeah, we don't know what happened there.
And the fat guy strapped to Cloud to get some cheap laughs.
It's funny because one's fat and they're both men.
Yeah. And then they're up there. She's like, oh, before I jump, let me tell you something. And then shuffles on a tiny pole, and Biggs is like, holy fucking shit, you're gonna get us murdered.
Going to die.
And then, like, I don't even remember what she whispers, but it's not important. And you're like, I can hear you from a foot away. Right? She's literally as close to what me and Ross are talking, which is like 6... She was less than COVID distance apart. And she's gonna risk their life to just, like, be playful. And it's like... I know it's supposed to be fun or whatever, but it's just so not fun when everything we've seen from Cloud is him being an edgelord and everyone just being like, he's so dreamy.
No, yeah. I hate it. So moving forward, they finish what we call Jessie's quest.
Jessie's quest. So we finished Jessie's quest, and we're kind of getting back into the main plot of the original game, which is they go on a second bombing run. Now, if you're a really studious original Final Fantasy VII player, which way too many people are, they'll remember that he already had agreed to go on this bombing run. But right now, they're going to talking about how Tifa and Jessie are going to go. And you're like, well, how are they going to do this? Like, how is he going to be convinced?
Yeah, Barrett's like, Cloud's not coming.
Yeah, and there's a scene where they're all kind of eating and you could talk to the people, but they don't let you, even though that would be fun.
Yeah, it's a moment everybody's like just sitting at tables eating and having fun together and just like hanging out, and you're like, oh, it's a break in the action. So you're like, oh, this is a good time. I can talk to people and get a little character out of them. No, you can't.
Yeah, everyone's like, this is a private Avalanche thing.
Please leave, player.
And like, even if they had that scene, just like, let me be fucking Tifa or Jessie or Barrett and just enjoy kind of the levity of the game. But that's not that important. It's just, well, how are we getting from plot A to plot B? And if you are really studious and also understand the creator of this game, Nomura's thinking, you might have pieced together what was happening, because you go to sleep and you wake up and Ghosts are everywhere again.
Dun dun dun.
And this is the second time you've seen Ghost. Now, for me personally, I remember playing this being like, Ghosts weren't everywhere in the first game, right? Am I forgetting Ghost being everywhere? I think I remember Ghost being everywhere. But you fight these... in my opinion, and I like the combat, but fuck, I hate these fights. It's just literally hacking and slashing until they die. It's the equivalent of just pressing the attack button in an RPG. To just stop the ghosts from existing, and you don't know why they're happening. And, oh no, Jessie broke her ankle, and then you have to go.
Yep, and that's it. So you're like, so Ghost showed up, and we killed them all, but Jessie broke her ankle, and now we're going on the bombing run, just like the first game.
So, I want to bring up at least what the ghosts are now, which, again, if you played the game, you know. But I think if they keep coming up, it's better to kind of talk about, to understand what their purpose was. They literally only exist to keep this game from not being the original Final Fantasy. Every time the plot might deviate, ghosts show up. So there was a little difference between me and Ross's run, where I didn't know this until near the end of the game. And Ross did know this because when I played this game, I had to complain about the ghost. So when you, especially playing it a second time and seeing why the ghosts show up, first I was like, this is unnecessary and I don't care. But now it's kind of like actively insane that a ghost just showed up to break Jessie's ankles so you can... Which is how is fate... Like, this is a very active version of God.
Yeah. Well, see, I find the ghosts really interesting, right? And not in a good way. Because they are a metacontextual plot device, right? They in many ways, like, they are the fourth wall. But they mean nothing to the characters. Like, the characters literally never have a conversation about the ghosts. Because what could they say? It'd be Barrett like, hey, did ghosts just show up? And everybody's got to be like, I guess. I don't know what that was about. And then they have to move on with their lives, right?
Which they don't ever say. Like, no one ever...
No, they never even go that far. They're just like, they just move on. Like, the instant the ghosts are gone, they're like, let's not ever discuss that. And so, the ghosts exist in this weird, like, third realm. They're not quite like outside the game, because they're physically in there, but they mean nothing to the characters. They only mean things specifically to plot, right? And I don't mean, what's interesting is, what does it mean to be a plot point, right? The ghosts don't care when you get into a battle if you beat the battle in a specific way. They only care if you beat the battle. They don't care that Barrett said Cloud shouldn't be, or won't be going on the bombing run. They only care that Cloud has to go on the bombing run. Because these are plot points, right? But plot doesn't exist in a real world. It's just, we live our lives through a series of events. They're not plot points in a story that's being told. So these ghosts represent the story itself and the way that Nomura is trying to manhandle it and trying to change it. And it just puts them in a very weird position. And the reason I'm going so long on this is because it takes you out of the game. When you see these ghosts, they are visual reminders that you are playing a game, specifically that you are playing a remake of another game, and you get taken out of the world. Because these ghosts don't really exist in the world. Because they mean nothing to anybody that you're playing. So you're just like, every time they show up, you're just like, oh, right, I'm playing a game now. And there's no reason to break immersion like that.
Yeah, also, like, you just think more, like, all these freaking NPCs saying nothing. Like, you pass people in the street, they say, like, the same 8 lines. And now one person is like, man, a bunch of fucking ghosts were in this town.
Man, there's a lot of ghosts today.
And, like, again, the characters don't. Like, so far the times we've seen the ghost were a time where they were invisible for some reason to everyone but Aerith, but then Aerith touches Cloud, so they're non-invisible, and then Tifa wakes you up because ghosts are everywhere, so she can see them, and Barrett can clearly see them, but also, they never acknowledge, like, that was weird.
Yeah, nobody's ever like, that was a weird one.
It is weird. And so, it just feels so fucking shoehorned in.
Yeah.
And, again, for no purpose, which we'll definitely talk about ghosts later, because... God, they make you think about Ghost a fucking lot.
Never stop.
And what the ghosts start doing becomes incredibly specific at some point.
Yeah.
So, these ghosts literally make the game to be the original game, except for everything that they skip from the original game was actually good, and I wish it was in the game. Like, for example, when you decide to go on the second bombing run, you go down the little elevator that is a pinball machine,
yeah.
Which is cool flavor.
It is super cool.
And you see their layer, and it's actually... the original game flushes out Avalanche. Like, Barrett punches Biggs and he hits the foreground and stuff. Like, it's actually a really fun scene. But the ghosts don't fucking show you the scenes you want to see. Your only Avalanche develop is everyone saying, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
You rude piece of shit. Except for, we all love you.
But that's exactly my point, right? Is the ghosts don't care about the inconsequential plot stuff. They don't care if you go down into the avalanche layer. They only care that you go on the bombing run because it's plot related, you know? So it's very weird for them to be like simultaneously arbiters of fate and arbiters of plot, because I think those are two different concepts, and Nomura doesn't seem to recognize that.
So we start our second bombing run, and again it has the same problem, which at this point I don't want to hold too much against the game, which is dungeon padding. Right? There's a whole extra chapter before you get to the bombing run of just like going in the tunnels to get there, and nothing plot happens except for every once in a while they flash to Heidegger being like, who is evil villain, who just is watching them on the cameras going ha 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 ha, ha, and like that's it.
You there, grunt, kill them or I'll kill you, ha 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 ha. And that's all Heidegger's personality. I've described him perfectly.
It's also distracting to me because he's voiced by Bender.
I know.
So it's just weird to flash to Bender just being like clacking his fingers and then laughing at the villains. Like, it's not that bad. Other games do crap like that all the time. But it more or less is just like, okay, this is a filler chapter. But at least it feels like a somewhat lot. Like, if you need to find filler, you just make the bombing run longer. I guess that's fine.
Yeah, and that's fine. And so on this bombing run, we get to an important part, I think, in the game, in which you have to turn off the sun lamps. And this is a stark difference between the remake and the original. The original, when you are in the slums, there is no sunlight. You don't get to see Midgar with natural light because you're completely enclosed by the plate. Now, this is phenomenally important because it's showing you the level of oppression that these people live under, the conditions that they have to experience, the inhuman conditions, and it makes you really hate Shinra. And you think, yeah, maybe I'd commit a terrorism to like save these people from their dark fate. In this game, you see the sun all the fucking time. The slums are as lit up as anywhere else, except that there are also sun lamps, but you don't see them from the ground. You only see them when you go on this mission. And to get from like point A to point B, you have to turn off the sun lamps and like divert power to various elevators, which is weird, but whatever. It's a plot thing. But Tifa has this moment right at the beginning where she's like, we have to turn off the sun for these people. We have to literally take their light away, you know, which is not the case because we've seen the sunlight and that wasn't coming from sun lamps. It was just you can see outside. So that kind of falls flat immediately. And then Barrett is like, we're going to blow up the reactors that power all these things. We're going to turn them off anyway. Just do it now. It's just a little bit early. And you're like, this is let's take the conceit and say that these sun lamps do represent all the sunlight that these people get. It's literally the sun in the sky for them. And we are there to destroy that in ostensibly an effort to save them from some greater threat. A threat that they will not be grateful that we save them from. Right? This is a really, really interesting thing. This is finally a section where somebody can question your motives and your actions as Avalanche. I got so excited when I heard them say that. It is never talked about again. That is it. Not even another line. Tifa immediately. She doesn't even like talk back to Barrett. Barrett's like, we're going to do it anyway. And Tifa's like, okay. And they just move on with their day. And we will never hear about this again. And that is what I'm talking about in this game. It's constantly setting up what should be interesting points and then dropping them immediately and never speaking about them.
It's like they had a rubric of what was like acceptable plot, development, right? It's like, well, you need to bring up like a motivation for Jesse, and they do the bare minimum. Like, it's like they're turning in their assignment of just like, I said the exact things I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
But you have to, like, to be an engaging narrative, you have to expand on it. You have to have more to say than just say, well, there are consequences. It's like, okay, well, how are these characters dealing with these consequences?
Are we going to see these consequences?
And the most common defense I've seen of this is just, well, they're going to talk about it later in other games. And it's like, well, that's not acceptable storytelling, in my opinion.
No.
You can't just have a character dealing with something they did 7 years later in whenever frickin' Final Fantasy VII 3 Remake comes out, which is probably about where this section would come up. Because there is a section in the original game where Barrett deals with the death of that. Like, the responsibility that he feels over the death of his fellow Avalanche members.
Yeah.
And it's way later in the game, but it's not that way later to the players who played the game because it was one game. Because you don't have to wait literally years. Like, we don't have a date for the second remake, and if they only did 6 hours now, we have no idea how long it will go.
No.
And so...
people are assuming there's going to be 3 of them.
And so I think it is an unfair defense to say, well, they took one section of the game, but you felt like it was a complete game. Except for all of the interesting points weren't necessarily covered in depth because it's only the first game. It can't be a complete game and none of the plot points go anywhere because you assume other games will do it.
Exactly. You know, it's really like a catch-22, you know? If they do something wrong, well, they're going to fix it in the next game. And if they do something right, it was because this game was a work of genius. And you just can't have it both ways.
And I think this also demonstrates how Tifa doesn't seem to have any character motivation whatsoever. This is the closest we get almost where she says, well, we're turning off the lights for the people. And the Barrett's like, don't worry about it. And that's kind of her whole character, or lack thereof character, is at best she says the plot out loud. Like literally exposition character. Just to say, we're doing this. And then someone else goes, let me explain that to you. We had some character moment with her where they said she kind of wanted out of being Avalanche. And then Cloud's like, I'll help you by going on another Avalanche bombing run. And that also doesn't develop anymore.
Nope.
Right? Like, she doesn't actually feel anything or have any motivation or have a reason she's doing anything. At the least, they showed a sick Jessie dad to kind of imply why she's an Avalanche. We have no idea why Tifa's helping Avalanche. She just this is her friends, and they're like, if your friends all told you to blow up a bridge, would you blow up a bridge too? Like, is that what's going on here? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's unclear. And it will not become more clear, because from this point on, Tifa has no character. Like, she almost had a character in the beginning, but from this point forward, she is exclusively there to voice the events you're seeing on screen.
And I think, I personally have argued that all the women in this game are there to just be different people. Cloud, you can roleplay in your harem anime where Cloud is the lead. Because she has no personality, she has no point. I literally call her Tofu Lockhart because she just lacks flavor. They know they don't have to do anything with Tifa, so they didn't. Right? They have to do something with Jessie because she's not there. But they know people are going to like Tifa regardless, so they're just not going to put the effort. It feels like almost everything, all the choices are based on the bare minimum they can do to get by.
And so we move forward, and Heidegger eventually shows up. Like, we fight a bunch of dudes, we fight a bunch of monsters, and Heidegger eventually shows up and is like, haha, I've got a boss fight for you. You guys thought you were getting away, but I've got a boss fight in store. Look, it's this big thing, you know? And Joy, you were particularly incensed by this, I think fairly. So I want you to describe this bit.
This bombing run has felt very similar to the first bombing run, where you do a dungeon, which is fine, it's an RPG, and then you get to the boss. And so you get to the end, and Heidegger announces the boss. And you're like, sweet. The boss fights are the fun part of the game. And Heidegger shows up, says you're on national television, or Midgard television. I don't know if they're a nation or not. And says, everyone is watching you, say hi, but in a Bender voice I can't do. And so you're like, okay, I'm prepared for the boss fight. You heal up, you walk into the next room, and it's just like a room with a computer and a bunch of dudes, and you're like, okay, I guess he's not here, but he should be soon. So you beat everyone in the room, and then they say, hey, can you find a key card to put in the computer to disable something in the boss fight? And then you find it in the same place, and you do it, and they're like, do you want to disable this? And you say yes. And then you do that 4 times.
Yeah, literally 4 times.
And that's what they do every time. They make a mechanic. So it's like a pretty simple mechanic, like make the boss fight easier by looking for this stuff and putting it in the computer, which, again, doesn't make a lot of flavor sense. But the main problem with it, other than it just not being that fun of a thing to do, because every time you enter a room, you fight objectively paper tissue guards. Like, you just press fucking / or whatever you use in this game, and they just fall to pieces.
Yeah.
And then you have to look for a key card on the same box every time, and then read a bunch of computer models on what the fuck you want to disable. And it doesn't really mean anything because you haven't fought the boss fight. You're just like, that sounds...
Yeah, they're just like, do you want the boss to have not big bombs? And you're like, yeah, I guess. I don't want that.
And it's on national television. Everyone would change the channel. They're like, look at these terrorists. Why don't you send more guards to stop them? It's like, we'll eventually get to the boss. Like,
the guards are in the next room. We have to wait for them to sabotage our monster.
Yeah, and like, it's also 4 rooms full of guards. Just pack them in one room.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to go Kill Bill style, right? Where you go one at a time at guy with the giant sword. Also, this will come up later because they're on national television, and there's no more distinctive group of looking people in the fucking game. One guy is the only black guy with a giant gun in his hand. The other walks exclusively around with a giant sword, and the other one is dressed like Tifa. Everyone would recognize these people. But you go, they announce the boss fight, and then it's supposed to be dramatic, and if you just walk down and you did the boss fight, it would actually feel like something. But it, no joke, takes over 30 minutes to get to the airbuster, to finally start the fight. And I remember when we were doing it, because even more stuff kept delaying. Like, Cloud has one of his classic, holds his head and sees Sephiroth. And Ross kept putting down his controller and then picking it up, and then something would happen to be like, I guess I'm not fighting him yet. And it's like, they just hype up this boss fight with everything imaginable, and then you fight it, and it's also objectively not fun.
Yeah. So in my experience with this boss fight, I got what we call Zing locked. Zing is a spell from Dragon Quest. It's basically a Phoenix Down, right? So the airbuster in his second phase, flies away from everybody, so he's really far away. So the only person that can hit him is Barrett, because he's the only one with long range. And my Barrett died, and then because no one else is actually hitting anybody, they're not generating ATB bars, which means they're not able to use items, because items require ATB. So Barrett dies, nobody has a resurrect, I only have Phoenix Down, so I have to switch to somebody else and run around in a circle for a while and try not to die until I get a Phoenix Down, and then I resurrect Barrett, and then he died because he resurrects with low health, and I can't give... Nobody has an ATB bar, so I can't use a healing potion, and nobody has Cure Spell, which also requires ATB. Barrett just, he resurrects with low health and then just dies instantly. And I do that for about 10 minutes straight while the boss is, really far away from me, and nobody can fight except Barrett. And it's just unbearably frustrating. And you finally get... And it's still not even hard. I didn't struggle with the fight. It just took forever. Because Barrett was dead, and there was literally nothing I could do about it.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of times... we haven't talked a lot about the game mechanics yet. And there's a couple of things that, we both mostly like the combat system. But one of the big glaring weaknesses, I think, of the combat system is it's pretty much not fun to not be Cloud or Tifa. Because Barrett's mechanic is you hold the triangle button. Or the square button, or whatever it is. And I think it's you hold the square button, and then sometimes you press the triangle button, which is your overcharge shot.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you can cast spells, but, it's... Everyone can cast spells, so it doesn't feel unique. So, the core building up your ATP meter is just unfun. Where slashing stuff and dodging with Cloud is actually kind of fun. Setting up Tifa's chi is actually kind of fun. But Barrett, and then later Aerith, just kind of stand from a distance and just press one button over and over again, so you can watch your ATB meter fill up. And it turns the ATB meter from being a thing that you manage into a chore that you wait for. And it also, in my opinion, makes all of the CC way more frustrating.
Yeah.
Because there's times where someone gets stunned, and you're just you just have to switch to a character who's not fun to play, and then wait 30 seconds so you can go back to doing the combat system. So I think maybe half the boss fights are pretty good.
Yeah.
Maybe that's maybe too high, that's maybe too low. I really haven't counted them in order. But there's too many fights like Airbuster where they spend the 45 minutes telling you you're going to fight them. And then there's literally at least 5 minutes of just Barrett shooting, and then Tifa and Cloud being like, so, what have you been up to lately? Just feeling like you're doing nothing. And you don't feel control. And it's not interesting. It's not hard. You're not what other, what tech I can do with my materia to make this fight easier. It's just is just time consuming.
So the second bombing run ends. You defeat Airbuster. Shinra talks about his evil plan. He blows up the bomb and blames it on you on national television. And you got to get out of the plant that's exploding. So it ends up that Cloud is that you barely get out, but Cloud's like hanging from a bridge. And this is classic from the first game. Cloud falls off the reactor down into the slums, and he's going to crash through the roof of Aerith's church, and that's where we're going to meet Aerith, right? So it is at this point we are starting to be able to predict the game, because we're literally as he's hanging there, it's classic. It's this classic idea of like how did Cloud fall that far and survive by like falling on a hard ground where just because he fell into flowers. And so we're like, I bet the plot ghosts catch him, right? And he starts falling, and there's plot ghosts, and they literally catch him on the way down, and allow him to like more gently fall through the roof, I guess.
And it's also rough because as the plot ghosts catch him, they show fucking Sephiroth and Zack. Now, if you are new to Final Fantasy, you're like, why did Cloud dye his hair? You just have no idea who the fuck that is.
Who's this guy?
And it's completely pointless, and you just see, and it's just like pointless transition to remind you you're playing Final Fantasy and Nomura loves Sephiroth and Zack. This is also when Ross pointed out that either Sephiroth or Zack, it doesn't matter, is nobody, because Nomura also made Kingdom Hearts, and he's up his own ass. He has to constantly just make the same game over and over again. But we actually have a section that I like, the one section of this game that I like. I think Ross likes more sections than I do, but this is the one thing I actually like, which is the early era stuff when you fall in the church.
Yes.
One of the reasons I like it is because we actually see what the game's strengths are employed better. So earlier in the game, we constantly just have Jesse just being in love with Cloud because he guess he's big and strong. And there's no payoff for that other than kind of fulfilling player fantasies. But with Aerith, it actually feels like it fits. You know, she's a girl in this scary Midgar, and she's just overwhelmingly bright and happy, and she kind of brings out the softer side of Cloud, because Cloud's just kind of a dick to everyone. This is one of the first sections where Cloud sometimes isn't a dick. Not all the time, but sometimes he isn't a dick. And so when she does a scene like, you be my bodyguard, I'll pay you in one date, it comes off as innocent and cute instead of overly pandering to the harem aspect of the game. It's like, do you want to date Tifa? Do you want to date Aerith? Do you want to date Jesse? That is just kind of dripping in the early game that to me I just feels gross and not very plot focused.
Yeah.
I think this part of the game employs all of the best strengths. We have a good soundtrack that already exists, and Aerith's theme really helps contrast what we've been doing on the bombing runs. Like, we fall here, we fall in this church. It's like the one part of the game that looks pretty. Like, this whole game has looked, in my opinion, super ugly and bland. But we see the flower bed, we see the church. It's the life you're looking for the game. It's the life picking through Midgar, which is a theme in the original game.
Yeah, and it's literally the point of the church. You know.
Yeah.
Aerith is connected to the life stream and everything, and you know the whole reason you're blowing up these reactors is to like save the planet and stuff. And Aerith is literally this pocket of life in this lifeless world.
And also, the other characters we've seen, like Tifa, they have just negatively developed. They've made her worse than she was in the original game. Aerith is, in my opinion, other than arguably Barrett, the one main character who the game added something to. I did not care that much for Aerith when I played the original game that much. But this game, they make her personality actually better. Until a point in the game, they decide to cut her personality on the table.
Yeah.
But she's fun. Like, that's the thing I think the game needed, is the game just doesn't have fun. Cloud never has fun. He's never playful. You don't really see the fun in Avalanche. It just all overwhelmingly is focused on Cloud, Plot Ghost, the same Fate, the same overly unimportant things that the original game wasn't even about. Whereas it's so interesting, in my opinion, to see kind of, well, these are the people that you would literally, they don't even talk about it, but they should be. These are the people that you would hurt by blowing up these reactors. Like, she carved out her life for herself in Midgar, and it is not a terrible life. Albeit, she is the one house in Midgard that is way bigger than everyone else in the slums. She lives in a weird slum mansion where everyone else lives in, like, literally buckets.
Yeah. But the pacing of this chapter is particularly good. We haven't talked about it much here, but the game likes to make you slow walk almost constantly. Every time you're doing anything that's not, like, specifically combat, you're probably walking slowly through a hallway, or shimming through a crevice, or crawling under some rubble, because pacing. And so when you first meet Aerith, well, after you get out of the church, there's like a section where you walk around. You have to like walk with Aerith to the slums, and it's like you move slowly, and it's actually nice because they're just having a conversation, and it's finally the only time I think the game has good pacing.
Because one of the staple of the more modern Final Fantasies, I think, is we have enough like technology to have banter while we walk. Right, we've had it in 13 and 15 and now 7 Remake, where while you walk, you can actually do character development without stopping the game to have a full cutscene. Earlier in the game, like the slow walking you talked about, the way they would use it is have Biggs be like, and then Jessie wanted to be a dancer, and you're like, okay, that's not interesting. I'd rather just walk forward at this point.
Yeah.
I've already read that she wants to be a dancer. You're not adding anything, you're not personality, you're just pointlessly expositing. You're pointlessly expositing. Whereas when you escape the church, the part what Ross was talking about is, again, visually engaging. Has kind of you learning about Aerith, a character you just met. It has Cloud kind of acting a little different, and it feels like an interactive cutscene, where all of the slow walking actually feels like just
intentionally
pointless.
slowing you down.
Yeah, intentionally slowing you down.
Yeah, because there's nothing's happening, so you're just moving slow, and you know it. You're viscerally aware of it at all times. And so this is the only time in the game I think the pacing is actually, well, there's 2 times in the game I think the pacing is pretty good, but one's much later. And so the other part about the church that's particularly good, really about Aerith's chapter in general, is you get to meet the Turks for the first time. Reno shows up and has an excellent boss fight. A truly fun boss fight in the church against Reno, and you get your limit multiple times against him and stuff, and he's actually kind of hard, like he's harder than any boss you fought so far, and it's just downright fun to fight Reno. He's such a fun, interesting character. He's got a bunch of one-liners. He's like a bad guy, but he's fun to listen to and fun to talk to, and he's a bad guy, but he's a cool guy, you know. And then you escape to the back of the church, and this was a moment we were both unsure about, because in the original game you have to do like this barrel mini game that's not fun. In this one you have to like crawl slowly across the rafters. You hang from the rafters, and you have to slowly, awkwardly move. And this shouldn't be the case in modern gaming. There's so many games like. Since games like Assassin's Creed exist, there's no reason that you have to slowly move in a single cardinal direction and awkwardly turn into another cardinal direction and move around on rafters like that. It is egregious how long and how boring that is. And the Turks are like just shooting at you on the ground, and they basically can't hurt you. It's just everything good that Reno sets up right before that is completely lost in the actual escape from the church.
Also, I think you forgot the most egregious part of that, which is already egregious in itself, is you beat Reno and you're going to go out the front of the church and ghosts drag you in the back. Because these fake ghosts literally are like, you gotta play the barrel minigame. Oh, fuck, there's no barrel minigame. Play another minigame that somehow works.
That's not the barrel minigame.
Yeah.
The ghosts are like, you're escaping the wrong direction. Like, what are you doing? You didn't care about anything else, but you care that we didn't play the barrel minigame? Come on.
And it's so weird, because, again, this is, like, the best section of the game, and it still has, like, just an egregious thing thrown in the middle. Because the good thing about Aerith and the Turks and all that stuff is you get, like, this Western song, and it gets you into the character. You feel more like Cloud as a cowboy for the first time, the way they use the music, right? You know, someone's coming into the saloon in the church, you know, and then you're there to protect, and then they just throw Ghost in it for no reason. It isn't thematic, it isn't interesting. They just thought it would look cool if ghosts were swirling around the church. And it takes you out. In the very least, we go back to the slow walking section we've already referenced, where that's actually a cool pacing stuff. But every time the game does something good, it's like it doesn't understand why it was good. Like, it literally can't comprehend what is interesting and fun and what is play the slowest monkey bar minigame.
Yeah, it always seems like they hit on fun by accident.
Yeah. So, this is the point where I think, man, maybe the game just starts off slow. You know, this is still early in the plot of the Midgar section. Maybe the game finds its footing here.
Yeah.
And there are a couple things that continue to be good. Like, obviously, we talked about how Reno's great. The walking is good. And the side quests that we didn't really talk about, but were objectively garbage, were a little bit better in this chapter. Not so much what you did, but at least there was some character development. There's a part where you're helping the children fight frogs or rats, because that's all you ever do. But when you start the side quest, you know, the idea is you're a mercenary and you're trying to get money in the town, and that's raise your fame for the future. That's how Tifa pitches to you. So if you help people out, more people will pay for your services. The kids are like, we can't afford you, Cloud. And he's like, I'll do it for 1 gil. And they're all like, what, really? And they're all excited. And it's like the first time Cloud is like willingly helping someone.
Yeah. This is the first time we've had any kind of character development with Cloud. Because normally he'd just be like, sorry kids, I only work for money. But these kids are like, we really need help. And if Cloud turns them down, like, they'll actually be in danger. Because they have to go, like, fight a big frog. Like a really powerful frog. And so Cloud's like, he can't get rid of his gruff guy persona, but he has to become a little softer. And he's becoming softer because he's hanging out with Aerith and he's seeing her be a good person, and it's, I guess, rubbing off on him. So yeah, he's like, I'll do it, I'll do it for 1 gil. And they're like, well, we'll definitely pay you. And he's like, all right, And so he's trying to be tough, but he's also trying to be kind. And it's like, you're like, oh, Aerith is a good character. Cloud's developing. The pacing's not bad. Side quests are a little shit, but at the same time, you just got a new party member with Aerith, so you're like, just fight some rats, I guess, and learn how to play. You're like, okay, and go help the kids.
Yeah, it's a reasonable choice to make. Even like the whole side quest section should be worked because you can only do the side quest in the chapter, and then they throw 6 at you or more at a time. So that is just a fundamental problem with the side quest. But as the application of the side quests go, it was one of the better ones because at least we have character development. Though, like everything, they have a scene like that, and then they have a scene where you help an old man get to his wife's grave or something, and then when you're done, you have to return the grave key. Doesn't really matter. It's dumb and pointless. But he's like, can you return this key for me? And he goes, I'll do it for 10,000 gil to the old man. And the flavor of it is he's trying to convince the old man to like work out and be healthy and not rot in his old age, right? But he just comes off like a dick again. And the man was just like, Jesus Christ, man. Kids, and like, he just rants because he's just so upset that the Cloud is being so heartless, even though it's supposed to be disguised as him being helpful. And like, you can just have him be helpful. You can just have a section where he sees why Aerith's way is better.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of the things I think about with the Aerith stuff is she is courageous with also being nice. She's not afraid of the Turks when she kind of should be. Right? I mean, you don't really, you as Cloud don't understand the backstory. But you see that you can be like a brave character, but still also just be a kind-hearted person like Aerith. And I like to think that Cloud sees the value in that. But is immediately ruined because they have to throw in some scene where he's just overwhelmingly kind of shitty about something.
Yeah. Spoilers, this shit never comes up again. Like, this is the most development we'll ever get out of Cloud.
Yeah, Cloud actively regresses.
Yeah, he will.
Again, every time the game does something, it regresses backwards. So one of the things I think one of my big kind of criticisms of the game is they have the tools, they have no idea how to execute them. So for a good tool they have is graphics are technically amazing.
Yeah.
Everyone's face, like Aerith's like whole face stuff looks insane. Like actually, I can't think of a better like Cloud in all their faces.
Yeah, everyone has the best character models. Cloud's swords, like showing the materia. I guess everybody's weapons like show the materia that you equip onto them. It looks amazing. It looks incredible.
But they make the environments look worse than they did in the original game, in my opinion. When you go through the slums in Final Fantasy VII Original, it is just dirt and stuff, but you see more like shacks, right? You see kind of like flavor built in what the models actually look like. Like, oh, these houses are literally made from junk.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
And they play with the lighting a lot. It's a lot of deep shadows and things like that in the first game. And in this game, it's one pale color of brown,
everywhere, and all the NPCs look the exact same. And there's like 6 NPCs that they use like the whole game.
Yeah, they're heavily repeated. Like you can see the same person sitting on like the same bench.
Yeah. And at least the Sector 6, which is where Aerith is from, looks slightly better than Sector 7. But it's like, there's one fucking tunnel made out of, like, a cinder block tube or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's kind of personality. But the whole slums are in one giant hallway. Like, literally the whole game of when you're in the underbelly of the city is just one hallway of the same gray. And none of the NPCs have any personality. Like, at the very least, when you play the old games and you talk to random stuff, they said more interesting things. They're just here to just be like, did you hear that they're a terrorist? Like, just, just restating the plot that you already knew, right? When you have the potential to make the slums actually feel like there's value in them.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's value to the slums to Aerith. I think that's a big thing, is establish that Aerith likes her life here. And I just don't think they show why she would do that. And they just... me and Ross have both seen a lot of people that they say that the world feels big, and I just don't understand how.
The world felt so claustrophobic and small to me. It was insane.
And that's not even going into the freaking number of crevices they make you crawl to load the areas that just become overwhelmingly tedious. Sounds like we're being kind of overwhelmingly negative for literally the best section of the game. You have the 2 best boss fights. We don't really talk about Brood, but it's another Turk. It's just fun scene that, it's storytelling boss fights, right? The Airbuster doesn't tell a story, right? What?
I did love Rude.
Yeah, I did love... there's a part where like his glasses break and he just puts on another one.
He literally has another pair of glasses on him.
It's kind of the personality I'm looking for in the game, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then we're going to a part that's pretty iconic in the whole Midgar section in both games that I feel like we're going to be the most negative about.
Yeah, 100%. This... we're gonna have to talk about Wall Market. And Wall Market is, everyone in I've ever heard talk about this game thinks Wall Market is the best part of the game, and I think we universally think it's overwhelmingly the worst part of the game.
It's officially when I'm just like, and Ross said out loud, it's like, wow, this game is now we're at the Irredeemable part.
Yeah. I literally would have stopped playing in Wall Market. And hi everyone, this is Future Ross here. I didn't feel I did a very good job of this the first time, so I'm adding this later. This is a trigger warning. We're going to be discussing a lot of sexual assault and sex trafficking. So if you can't listen to that sort of thing, I'm very sorry. And you can skip ahead to roughly the 1:45 mark.
So after a section of just overwhelmingly innocence, I mean, right before you go to Wall Market, you're literally on a playground with Aerith, talking about her path. Like, it's just a childlike innocence.
Yeah.
We go into the Las Vegas of Midgar, the Den of Sin. You literally were in front of Sector 7. You can just continue the plot. And I know this is the original game, but I also don't think it should be in the original game. This is kind of a critique of both games, in my opinion. I don't think Wall Market needs to exist. But Tifa is literally in, like, a chocobo drawn carriage, like she's Beauty and the Beast being carted off to the Castle of Evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's dressed overwhelmingly, revealingly, which is a choice you actually... Like, the one choice that matters in the game is what Tifa dresses like, because of course it is.
Yeah, there's a few times they let you make choices, but those choices never matter because you always get the same cutscene no matter what you say. Except for this one time where Tifa's like, Cloud, how do you think I should dress? And you're given like 3 options, which are like mature or exotic, which is horribly offensive. Because exotic is you dress like a Chinese person, and mature is you dress in a fucking nightgown. So it the choice you make there will change what outfit, what sexy outfit Tifa's wearing. So Tifa's intentionally been captured so that she can go extract information from this guy named Don Corneo. So Don Corneo is a mob boss and a rapist and a murderer. He employs 3 people that collect young women for him and bring them to his palace that he can rape them and have the other ones, I guess, murdered and raped by his subordinates.
Until he gets bored of it, and they also murder the people that he just raped.
Yeah,
which they say very explicitly.
Yeah, he's got a dungeon. He's got a lever where the floor falls out in his room, and it just ends up in the sewers with a big monster. So you can imagine that's what happens to the women that go into Don Corneo's palace. And so Tifa is going there to extract information because Don Corneo is evil, therefore he is connected to Shinra. And our mission now is to save Tifa. And you would think, well, Don Corneo is the evil piece of shit, and we know Tifa's gonna be in his palace. We should just bust in, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we're already terrorists. That's all we do is bust in places and fuck shit up, right? No, we're not gonna do that.
And this is another example that keeps happening, where the game is like, here's something really pressing. A good example is you're about to fight an Airbuster boss fight, and you're just going to spend forever getting to that point and just be doing so much other stuff that you literally forget why you're there in the first place. Because they added a bunch of stuff to Wall Market where you literally have to talk to the literal freaking pimps that Don Corneo has that approve of people. And they're supposed to be likable characters.
Yeah, they're supposed to be interesting characters because you spend your entire time in Wall Market dealing with them and doing side quests for them. They're like, oh, we can't put you into Don Corneo's palace. I've already sent people there. And you're like, oh, please help us. And they're like, well, do a bunch of side quests for us. And they're supposed to be fun and interesting. You do Coliseum fights and stuff. You
do a dancing minigame.
Yeah, you do the dancing minigame in the Honeybee, which you should look up on YouTube. It's actually great visually to see. You do a bunch of stuff, but for Joey and me at least, it was all completely undercut by the fact that one, we seem to be on a deadline, right? Tifa's in trouble. We need to help her. Why are we doing dancing minigames right now? Why are we working out in the gay gym? Why are we fighting in a Coliseum? And then 2, all of these people are sex traffickers that we're working for.
Ridiculously unredeemable job.
Yes.
Literally the worst thing you can possibly be. I mean, I guess we're terrorists, but they're fucking sex traffickers.
We're at least eco-terrorists.
Yeah, we're at least believe that we're helping the world, a thing that we want to explore.
These are just bad people, and we're working for them without thought. We're having fun.
And again, the danger of these scenes, the pressing nature of it, could just be done if you were in Wall Market for a bit and then Tifa showed up. And I understand that the original game, that's what drags you to Wall Market. But you also didn't spend an hour in Wall Market. You just have to write the game a little bit differently. You could be doing the stuff in Wall Market, but it's not exclusively to trick sex traffickers into helping you. You can just do stuff in Wall Market and they not be sex traffickers and they contribute to the plot some way and just write it differently. They write other stuff differently. They wrote him going in the second bombing run differently, but instead they have to put a time limit and then just make you forget about it because, you're just having a jolly old time.
Yeah, it's just a fun old time. And I want to be clear that these characters, they didn't exist in the original game. These were all added in this game. So they actively thought a part of the original game that was, Don Corneo's rape dungeon, they thought, well, let's leave that in and let's dramatically expand on that concept. And that's offensive to me, and it should be offensive to everyone. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to be apologetic about this. They're gonna say, oh, it's just a game, or oh, it's in the original game. But 1, it shouldn't be, and 2, you shouldn't be so comfortable with it.
And I think there's actually a bunch. It's hard to break down exactly the levels and the types of things that are offensive. One thing, Wall Market is supposed to be a den of sin, and almost everyone is queer coded.
Yeah.
Everyone, the guy in the Honeybee is clearly, a gay archetype. So is everyone at the gym, and everyone has this sort of it has an implicit message that people who are different sexually live in the land of the deviants, where everyone serves a literal sex rapist that we just are implicitly cool with. And it just sends such a weird and awkward message, and it just turns everything. This is the most life we have in the game, and all of it is just this stupid den of sin that doesn't say anything. No one seems to care. Tifa shows no concern about what Don Corneo's doing, about the danger that she's placed, at what the implications of what you're doing. This is the time where Tifa and Aerith are having the most fun, because you're going on a dancing quest, and you're doing just silly side games. Cloud is in a dress. But they're literally... No one but Don Corneo is meant to be felt like a villain. And Don Corneo is comedic relief. And I think that's kind of one of my big problems with this whole section, is when you're in the frickin' sex dungeon, where you literally see, straight up sex torture devices, but you get to Don Corneo, he literally laughs like he's fucking a Boss Nass from episode 1 of Star Wars. Sorry, it's actually Scooby-Doo. And he's wiggling his jowls and supposed to be goofy, and you're like, oh, rapist, we're gonna beat you easily, even though you constantly get away and commit all these crimes, and we're just gonna have you as a fun side thing. And the other thing that grosses me out about this whole section is so much of this game comes off like a dating simulator. And it feels like another situation to put the girls in a different fetish. And that fetish being rape cosplay, for lack of a better term. And it just feels really aggressive, because when you're down in the dungeon, it's the time you can literally get the girls to spin for you or something.
Yeah, so what happens is you do all these side quests for the sex traffickers, right? And then you get Cloud in a dress, and you finally get into Don Corneo's palace. They take you up to a room. It's you and Aerith, right? They take you up to a room, and they close the door, and you're like, oh, what are we supposed to do? Where's Don Corneo? And then gas fills the room, and you're like, oh man, did he see through our plot? Did he see us coming, and he's gassed us, and now he's captured us? And then you wake up with Tifa in a torture chamber, and you realize that this is standard procedure. The women are taken to his house and then gassed and put in a torture chamber, and then he selects which one he wants to rape and which one he wants to give to his goons to rape and then presumably murder. Because he just goes about his normal day. He hasn't figured you out. This is just what he does. This is how you get through Don Corneo's palace. And then he picks whoever he thinks is prettiest, and the other two are sent to his goons. And then you beat the shit out of everybody. You just kick the shit out of everybody in the house, and you beat your way out of there. It's so frustrating, because you're like, I've been in Walmart for 2 hours doing a bunch of side quests, just feeling horrible and gross the entire time, constantly wondering, why can't I just bust in there? And what do? You just bust out. You just kick everyone's ass and leave. And it's insanity. How much they manage to waste your time, how much they manage to gross me out, and then at the end, you don't even get any satisfaction of kicking Don Corneo's ass, because he just pulls a lever and you fall through the floor. And that did happen in the first game. I expected it, but it's even worse because you spent so much more time. Walmart in the first game is a few minutes. You do one side quest to get in there, to get Cloud in a dress, and you get in there, and that's homophobic as it is, but
yeah, it's a bad side. It's not fun in the other game.
No, it's not fun.
It's just,
but it's short.
Yeah, it's shorter.
And so you spend all this time just to not really accomplish anything. You get information that Shinra's going to blow up the plate that hangs over the entire district, and then he drops you into the sewers. And I was seethingly mad when I got into the. Oh, yeah, sorry. To get back to what you said, this is why I got on this rant. When you get into the torture dungeon, in this game, Tifa and Aerith stand on either side of the room, still in the torture dungeon. On either side of the torture implements, there's like a big rack behind Tifa that you hang people from and hurt them. And you can, if you talk to one of the girls in the room, they just do some animation. They're like, oh, Cloud, and they do like some sexy animation. And you can just stay there as long as you want and have these girls just do animations in this rape torture dungeon. And it is the sickest thing I've ever seen in a video game. It chilled me to the bone. I hated it. This is the point where you can utilize their character models in any way you want. And it's the worst thing imaginable. Because you know what they want you to do. So, I literally said to Joey, if I wasn't doing this for research, if I wasn't specifically playing this game to do a podcast, I would quit. I would stop playing this game right now. I wish no money had been given to this game. This is horrible.
And that's like, it's really, I think, actually hard to like tackle all the problems with it, because on one side, I think one of the big things we're kind of talking about now is using rape to be a fetish in the dating sim of your game, right?
Yes.
Like, that just feels gross. So I feel like there's like a lot of layers or whatever to why all the different things the wall market is. There's the rape fetishizing thing. There's queer-coded, everything's queer-coded and also bad. But it bothers me so much that characters like Tifa show no concern whatsoever. And if you would argue it's just because they're brave, there's literally just a very kind of long, random conversation where you have to go into a men's restroom to sneak in Summer and Shinra. And Tifa is so concerned about it. It is the thing that she is most worried about in the game. I don't know if it's a joke. I don't know if it's a weird sexualized thing. But it's not. It doesn't feel like, it's not funny. It's not whatever. And she should be more concerned about the rapist than going into a men's restroom.
Yeah.
It's just absurd. And the fact that is like the most Tifa ever argues or says anything about going into a men's restroom, where the rest of the game she's just kind of passively being pulled along in the plot, even though you should be really upset that there is a rapist dungeon that affects tons of people. Like, you're a terrorist group supposed to be helping out the little guy in some ways. This is a perfect person that you could just murder.
Exactly.
And I think there is a fun section in Wall Market, which is the dance.
Yeah, the dance is fun.
Which, again, I think is undercut because the guy's literally a sex trafficker and we just have to be cool with that. And also, the gameplay for the dance actually isn't fun. It just looks fun.
No, it's super not fun to play. Like, I thought it was going to be interesting because I'd seen the Honeybee before I played. And I was very excited for it. But honestly, I spent my whole time, like, making sure I was hitting my DDR buttons properly instead of, like, being able to watch the cutscene. It kind of felt like I was watching Metal Gear Solid 4 again, where, like, anybody watching the game gets to, like, see the cool fight scene with Raiden and Vamp, and whoever's playing the game has to, like, really concentrate on shooting Rexes with their rocket launcher. It sucks.
So, other than the Coliseum and the dance, that's the only parts of Wall Market I think are entertaining at all. There's literally a whole side quest where you follow around Johnny, the most annoying character in the world, and it's just you chasing him around town and picking shit up. When you're in the frickin' sex dungeon part, it's mostly really long cutscenes that feel like they're supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really don't know the intention. It's not dramatic because Don Corneo is a fucking Scooby-Doo cartoon. You don't feel tension because you're getting information that, like, it just seems weird that the only person you can get information from is Rape Mafia boss. Yeah. It's not, like, adequately explained. It's just kind of an excuse to be here.
Yeah, it's... we think it's because he's, like, the mafia of the area, so he's just, like, involved in crime, and therefore with Shinra.
Yeah, so Shinra just informs him of their going on.
Yeah, Shinra's just, like, telling him this unrelated guy that they're gonna drop the plate. Like, a thing they really shouldn't be telling anyone.
Yeah.
And yet they are. And so it's very weird that we have to get this information from Don Corneo in the first
It's
place.
also pointless information because You don't get there in time. So you, like, everything you did would have been better served if you just never walked into Walmart and you're like, Tifa, no, let's just not go to Walmart.
Yeah, if Tifa had consulted anybody before, like, going off on her own to get kidnapped by a rapist, we wouldn't have had to deal with any of that. We could have saved the plate, you know? But that's plot stuff, you know? Fine, we didn't save the plate. Don Corneo drops us into a hole, and we go into the sewers. That's the last we're going to be talking about Walmart and the problems therein.
Now, we feel like you have now received a pretty full-length podcast at this point. You've really experienced, you know, what a normal podcast would feel like. But you might be thinking, you're only a little over halfway through the game. Well, that is for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, coming at some point to a place near you. Now, it will only cost you $60 a podcast. Go to any place where you can pay for that's not, people don't pay for podcasts.
They don't pay for podcasts?
Okay, but for real, we do have to split this podcast up into two parts because we talked way too long. I think there's just a lot to say, and we haven't even got into any of the what the hell are you thinking Nomura stuff. But there is just a lot of problems in the first half of the game, and it somehow gets worse in the second half of the game.
We're only halfway through the game, and I am not going to do a full wrap-up of it halfway through, but just to summarize some things that I think are coalescing at this point, it's very clear, or it's at least becoming very clear, that the game developers, that EA and Nomura, are interested in making sort of two kinds of stories. One, they want to be very faithful to Final Fantasy VII, and two, they want to make their own new thing. And to do that, they've sort of just mashed those things together, and what we're getting is sort of neither one nor the other. The problem is that this has sort of destroyed the characters and the pacing and the storytelling of the game. We've got a bunch of awkward side quests, a bunch of weird dialogue, characters that have not developed really in any way. We've had some good moments, right? But those moments are just trying to be reminiscent of the original game. But at the same time, those moments are still being punctuated by like plot ghosts and long episodes of filler. And we don't really understand what the game is trying to do at this point. And unfortunately, these are problems that are only going to get worse as the game goes forward. They're trying to sort of be a role-playing game, but they've removed the roles, right? And as a playing game, it's doing all right, arguably. But as an actual role-playing game where you try to embody a character like Cloud, we don't really have anything. We just have a lot of pointless side quests and filler and awkward moments and, frankly, terrible expansions on ideas from the old game. So it's unclear what they're trying to do, and I don't think that's going to be fixed later on.
And the last thing I would say is, it feels like with anything that kind of works in this game, other than, again, the one chapter I like at this point, which is the Eris chapter, where I felt like they actually did use their own ideas to make her character a little bit better, is it everything that they're actually doing is coasting off of the success of the previous game. Like, Cloud doesn't show you any reason for you to like Cloud. I find him super unlikable, but people already like Cloud, and they're like, wow, Cloud's here. You know, it's like the same thing that the Star Wars movies do, where it's like, you already like Stormtroopers and the Empire and all that stuff, so just like this one because it's more of that. And it just comes off transparently lazy to me.
Yeah, it's a lot of, as Red Letter Media would put it, I know what that is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, you remember Final Fantasy VII, or you don't, and you only know it by reputation as like the greatest game of all time. So play this game, and you know, if you don't like it, you're going to be in the minority, and therefore don't talk about how much you don't like it. But that's going to be our episode. Thanks for listening. Our next episode is going to be out next week. Every time we break up these podcasts, we're going to try to do them. We're going to try to iterate them every week. Otherwise, we'll be releasing monthly, the first of every month. The next episode is going to deal with Shinra, Nomura's weird mindset in this game, and especially the ending, which I know is the thing most people want to talk about in the remake. So, that being said, we have a Twitter. Follow us on @bossdoor4. That's bossdoor and the letter 4. We don't have other social media.
4 is a number.
What? Cut that.
You said the letter 4.
The letter 4. It's my first day. Anyway, thanks for listening.